with danger and with daring rights. To the hilt we take you there, where courage meets a throat.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're not just looking at an interesting life, we're plunging, like, headfirst into the absolutely extraordinary world of Count Desmond.
Yeah.
Think of the most daring performers, the ones who make you gasp.
Mm-hmm.
Now add razor-sharp steel into the mix.
Exact. We've got a truly compelling set of sources for you today. There's the book To the Hilt, A Sword Swallower's History of Sword Swallowing.
Right.
And also the Sword Swallowers Association International Hall of Fame website. That's at swordswallow.com.
Swordswallow.com. Got it.
And interestingly, that website also hosts something called To the Hilt podcasts. So, there's even more to explore there if this grabs your interest.
Good to know. So for you tuning in, prepare to have your ideas about what's possible, well, seriously challenged. We're going to unpack the unbelievable story of someone who didn't just entertain.
No.
He seemed to flirt with the very limits of human endurance. His performing career, it went from 1957 all the way through the 1990s.
Wow. Long career.
Yeah, and he became known for doing something that sounds almost physically impossible. Swallowing a staggering 13 swords.
13.
Often while pulling off equally, death-defying stunts.
And here's a fact that immediately grabs you. Despite that grand title, Count.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a hereditary thing, and Desmond wasn't the name he was born with either.
Really? Okay.
However, when you hear about his 1980 stunt hanging upside down, spinning hundreds of feet over Niagara Falls from a helicopter,
Oh my God.
and swallowing a sword upwards, that was absolutely real.
Unbelievable.
And almost unbelievably, given the risk involved, it all went down on Friday the 13th.
You're kidding, Friday the
On
13th.
Friday the 13th.
Okay, so how does someone even get to the point of doing something like that? Let's dig into the making of this legend.
Right.
He was born Edward Benjamin, July 30th, 1941, in Binghamton, New York. He even went to Northeast Bradford High School.
Yeah, pretty normal beginnings, you'd think.
Doesn't exactly scream world-famous sword-swallowing daredevil, does it?
Not really. But what's fascinating here is the spark. When he was just 10 years old, he saw a circus sword swallower perform.
Ah, okay.
And apparently, this made such a huge impression on young Edward that he went backstage, found the guy, and actually asked him to teach him.
At 10 years old.
At 10.
Yeah.
And remarkably, the story goes that the sword swallower actually agreed, showed him some basics.
Wow. Okay, now jump ahead a few years. 1956, he's 15.
Right. This is when the really intense training starts.
Mm-hmm.
He began learning to swallow coat hangers.
Coat hangers, like regular metal coat hangers?
Yes, regular metal coat hangers.
Yeah.
In his own bedroom. His guide in this incredibly risky process was Stan Marie, a sword swallower with the King Brothers Circus.
Okay.
Marie happened to be performing in Binghamton then. And here's a detail that really adds another layer.
What's that?
Before all this, Edward apparently saw himself as a Pentecostal preacher boy. He got teased a lot at school.
Oh, wow.
And he actually said in a 1977 interview that his motivation was to do something so unique, so impossible seeming, that it would finally make him popular, make him stand out.
Huh. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? The things that drive us to seek recognition.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine the sheer determination, maybe a bit of youthful bravado, right?
Mm.
To pursue something so painful, potentially fatal.
Just to fit in.
Just to fit in. The sources mentioned there were a lot of sore throats during that first 6-month training period
I bet.
before he finally managed to swallow that first coat hanger in 1957. Gives you a little glimpse of the physical toll.
Yeah, no kidding. And from coat hangers, he launched a performing career with the Shrine Circus.
That's right. Initially, still swallowing the coat hangers. But he felt, and these were his words, that it was becoming a hang-up.
Huh. I'm sure he appreciated the pun.
Probably. So he progressively moved on, swallowing things like drumsticks, pool cues, and of course, actual swords. By the late 1950s, the persona of Count Desmond was born. And he wasn't just swallowing things. He was working with the Shrine Circus as a ringmaster, a sideshow talker, even a fire manipulator.
Wow. A real jack of all trades for a young performer.
If you think about sideshow history, that kind of multi-talented performer was actually pretty common.
Yeah.
You had to wear many hats.
Right. Keep the audience hooked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So August 1967, our Count was with the Circus Bartok sideshow, doing his fire-eating, sword-swallowing, but also managing the whole show for Milton Doc Bartok.
He managed it too.
Yeah. And get this, it seems like the daring performances ran in the family. His wife, Loretta, She was a hair-hanging artist.
Whoa, hanging by her hair. That's a whole other level of extreme commitment.
It really is. Hard to even imagine.
Absolutely. The sources also mention his work for the March of Dimes back in Binghamton between 70 and 71. He performed alongside his assistant, who had this intriguing name, Princess Eustasia.
Princess Eustasia. Love it.
And he made appearances with his friend Rick Dennis on Circus Bartok during that time, too. It's interesting, how he used his unique skills for charity as well.
And what's also noteworthy, I think, for you listening, is that he wasn't just focused on his own performances. He also became a teacher.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He mentored Dale Pritchard in 1975 and Rhea Roma in the winter of 77 in the art of sword swallowing.
Huh. So he wanted to pass it on.
Seems like it. A desire to not just master this incredibly unusual skill himself, but also, pass it on, ensure it continued somehow.
And by 1979, he was really making a name for himself. Wider stage, performing everywhere, nightclubs, burlesque shows.
Even the Bowery in New York City.
Right, and the Guinness Book of World Records Museum down in Myrtle Beach. He was actively building that reputation, pushing his performance boundaries.
And his look. His appearance was undoubtedly a huge part of that persona. You have to try and picture this.
Okay.
A guy over 6 feet tall, thin frame, sporting this really distinctive red goatee, and a truly enormous, bushy red afro.
How big we talking?
Some accounts say it was as big as a beach ball.
No way.
Seriously. And his clothes were just as flamboyant. Flashy satin tuxedos, just covered in rhinestones, which apparently he often wore just as like his everyday street clothes.
Get out.
All popped off with a dramatic crimson cape.
Yeah.
It's the kind of image that would definitely make you look twice.
Absolutely turn heads. And let's not forget the details that made his look truly unique. He wore rings, right? On every single finger.
Every finger. And he had this absolutely one-of-a-kind trademark, this pendant, like a 3-inch saucer-sized pendant.
Okay.
Inside it, a wooden spider, a tiny miniature sword piercing it, and incredibly, a mixture of his own blood and the spider's blood preserved right in there.
Whoa. His blood? That's intense.
That's where his nickname Spider-Man actually came from.
Okay, that makes sense now.
Spider-Man. And his swords weren't just any swords, custom-made, 26-inch surgical steel blades. You just have to admire the dedication to this very specific, very out-there image.
It's almost like performance art in itself, isn't it?
Totally. There's this great little story about him mowing his lawn while wearing his signature crimson cape in Bradford County, Pennsylvania.
Mowing the lawn in a cape.
It really paints a picture, right?
No.
Someone who fully lived this larger-than-life persona, not just on stage.
Definitely. And then, of course, there are the Guinness World Records. He started breaking records with 8 swords in 1978, but clearly he was driven to push further, eventually reaching that mind-boggling 13 23-inch swords swallowed at the same time.
13 swords.
A feat documented in the 1984 Guinness Book of World Records. That's a level of physical mastery that's just almost incomprehensible.
Well, what's particularly interesting here for you to note is the controversy that actually surrounded that 13-sword record.
Controversy? How so?
Apparently, when he pulled the swords out, there was a noticeable amount of blood on them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This worried the Guinness officials so much at the time that they actually decided to retire the whole sword-swallowing category.
They retired the category?
Yeah, they basically said no more claims because it was just too dangerous. Of course, as we know, sword-swallowing records have since come back.
Right.
But it really speaks to just how extreme his achievements were considered back then.
And it's probably not surprising there was blood involved. I mean, this was a guy constantly pushing the absolute limits of what his body could take. He himself said, back in the late 70s, that he'd perform in nearly 800 shows.
800.
And had been carried off stage, injured 17 different times, with another 60 or 70 other injuries on top of that.
That's just an astonishing level of risk.
Yeah.
And physical punishment, really.
Yeah.
The sources give some pretty unsettling details about those injuries, too. There was one time where a regular table knife.
A table knife.
Yeah, just a table knife. Actually slipped and went right into his stomach. Needed emergency surgery.
Jeez.
And then there's that really alarming incident in Guelph, Canada, March 1980. During a show at the Royal Hotel, a 3-foot-long sword somehow punctured his esophagus. He blamed it on having an inflamed throat from a cold. But what's striking is the news report about it even mentioned his Guinness World Records status. kind of highlighting the extreme nature of his job.
But even those incredibly dangerous incidents, they almost seem to pale in comparison to his most famous stunt, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Friday the 13th, June 1980. He took his already incredibly daring act to a whole new level.
Okay, set the scene.
Imagine this, hanging completely upside down, spinning from a helicopter hovering 200 feet above the churning water of Niagara Falls.
Spinning while upside down from a helicopter.
Yes. And then, in that position, swallowing a sword upwards towards the sky.
That's, I mean, words fail. It's beyond belief.
This feat got him international recognition.
Yeah.
And that pretty dramatic title, Niagara Falls' only living aerial daredevil.
I'll say. It truly underscores his relentless drive, doesn't it? Not just mastering sword swallowing, but mixing it with the most extreme physical risks you can imagine.
Exactly. It's one thing to perform on a stable stage. It's completely different doing it hanging hundreds of feet up.
Right.
From a moving helicopter over Niagara Falls. What do you even make of that level of boundary pushing?
Which just makes you wonder about the mindset, right? What's going on inside? And it didn't stop with putting his own body at risk like that.
No.
He also brought in this really wild, almost unbelievably trusting audience interaction.
How so?
He would invite complete strangers from the audience up on stage and have them actually push swords down his throat. Strangers, sometimes even while he was blindfolded. Part of what he called his suicide show.
Wow. The level of faith, or maybe recklessness, on both sides there is just staggering.
Totally.
And maybe unsurprisingly, given the danger that trust sometimes had serious consequences.
Yeah.
There's this particularly disturbing story. A young man, during one of these suicide show bits, actually jammed a blade down his throat so hard that it brushed against his heart and ripped his esophagus.
Oh, my God.
Resulted in another immediate trip to the emergency room. He even pointed out himself this specific act, letting someone else push the sword. That wasn't something Dennis would ever recognize.
Right, because it's just too uncontrollable, too risky.
Exactly. They explicitly prohibited it.
You'd think that brush with death would be enough to make anyone pause, maybe reconsider.
You would think. But he just kept finding new, unnerving ways to shock and amaze people. He was known to swallow a vibration microphone.
A microphone?
Yeah, vibration mic, hooked up to the sound system, amplified so the audience could actually hear his heartbeat.
Whoa. That must have been incredibly intense, especially given the stress his body was under.
Can you imagine? And his creativity in pushing those performance boundaries seemed almost limitless. There's even mention of this incredibly audacious plan he had, though it's unconfirmed if he ever did it.
What was the plan?
To ride a motorcycle through a 30-foot tunnel of fire.
Okay. Standard Daredevil stuff so far.
With a sword sheathed in his throat.
Right. Okay, less standard.
And the truly unbelievable part. The plan was to then flip the blade free while still moving and ride another 50 feet into a wall of fire.
While still on the bike.
While still on the bike. And get this, without even using the handlebars to steer.
That sounds physically impossible and completely insane.
Like something straight out of a movie, right?
The source material does note, right, that there's no solid proof he actually attempted that specific stunt.
That's correct. No definitive confirmation. But even the fact that he conceived of such a thing,
Yeah.
it really tells you something about his mindset.
Yeah.
As he himself very shrewdly observed, people come to watch me because they think they might watch me die.
Wow.
They want to watch the danger, not just the performance. That's a pretty raw, pretty honest take on the appeal of his work.
Definitely. So later in his career, around 1990, he took on the role of ringmaster.
What?
With the Royal Hannaford Circus.
That's right. He also kept performing with other notable acts, like the Worldwide Indoor Circus, the Vaughan Brothers, and in various carnival and nightclub shows across the U.S. and Canada, often sharing the bill with his longtime friend, Rick Dennis.
And there's that fascinating little detail about him doing a school performance, too.
Yeah. Athens Area Middle School in Athens, Pennsylvania. Also back in 1990.
Can you imagine being a middle school kid seeing that? Talk about leaving an impression.
Oh, for sure. You wouldn't forget that assembly.
He officially retired from the constant touring grind in 1994, settled down in northeastern Pennsylvania. But his passion for performing, it never really faded completely. He kept doing local shows for several more years.
Seems so. And his Guinness records, it's worth just quickly running through them again to appreciate the scale.
Okay.
First, swallowing 5 swords and 3 coat hangers.
Right, coat hangers ago.
Then upped it to 10 swords. And finally reaching that incredible 13 sword mark on July 6th, 1980.
The one that made Guinness pause the category.
Exactly. That record, due to those safety concerns we talked about.
And beyond just the number of swords, he also swallowed a coat hanger while riding a mechanical bucking bull.
Yes. That combination is just something else.
A skill set you don't see every day.
Not at all. And let's not forget the live microphone stunt. The first time he pulled that off was apparently with the band Alabama.
The country band.
Yeah, at the Bowery in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. He truly was a master of the bizarre, the dangerous, and the just. Unforgettable.
It performed in some pretty big venues, too, right? Like Madison Square Garden?
Madison Square Garden, the Gator Bowl complex.
Right.
Yeah. And interestingly, his adult nightclub shows, apparently he wrote most of them himself.
Oh, another layer. Writer, too.
Seems so. Another creative dimension.
And his reach went way beyond live shows. Count Desmond was on numerous national and international TV and radio shows.
Brought his unique talents to a global audience.
The list is pretty impressive. The David Frost Guinness special, that's incredible. Guinness World Record breakers.
The classic game show, I've Got a Secret.
Right. You asked for it. PM Magazine International. Even a Soviet television interview.
Yep. 2020 News Magazine and that Japanese show, Saturday Top Special.
Where he did the upside-down spinning sword swallow.
That's the one. He's a true international sensation.
And his contributions, they were officially recognized, weren't they, in 2005?
They were. He received the SSAI Lifetime Achievement Award from the Sword Swallowers Association International.
SSAI, yeah.
And the award specifically honored him for being a pioneer in combining those incredibly dangerous daredevil stunts with the already perilous act of sword swallowing. He also got a gold medal from Japan, recognized as one of the top 15 daredevil acts in the world.
And that was specifically for the upside-down stunt.
Specifically for that astonishing upside-down sword insertion performed by his wife, Loretta.
Wow, what a life. After all that constant flirting with danger. Count Desmond, real name Edward Benjamin. He passed away on December 18th, 2022.
Yeah, at age 81. And it wasn't, some stunt gone wrong. It was peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by family in Bentley Creek, Pennsylvania.
That's good to hear, in a way.
It is. And the details around his passing offer one last kind of poignant glimpse into his character.
Oh, yeah.
According to his wishes, no formal funeral services, he was cremated, and a portion of his ashes, they're to be scattered over Niagara Falls.
Niagara Falls, wow, that's fitting. A dramatic tribute to his most iconic stunt.
Absolutely. The rest of his ashes will be at the East Herrick Cemetery in Wyalusing, Pennsylvania. And his family also planned a future celebration of life ceremony to remember his extraordinary existence.
And his legacy continues to be recognized. In 2025, his life and career are featured in that book, To the Hilt, A Sword Swallower's History of Sword Swallowing, which, in a really lovely gesture, is dedicated to his memory. Looking back at the timeline, 1941 birth, all the way to this posthumous recognition, it really highlights the profound, lasting impact he had on performance, on the public imagination.
Definitely. This deep dive has truly only, scratched the surface of the incredibly remarkable, often unbelievable life of Count Desmond.
Absolutely. And if you, the listener, are as fascinated as we are and you want to delve even deeper into this extraordinary world, we really encourage you. Visit the Sword Swallowers Association International Sword Swallowers Hall of Fame online. That's swordswallow.com.
Right. And you can also check out the To the Hilt podcast there for even more stories, more insights.
Good tip.
And for a much more comprehensive look at the history of this unusual art form, definitely seek out the book. To the Hilt, A Sword Swallower's History of Sword Swallowing by Dan Meyer and Mark Hartzman, published by Schiffer Books.
Okay. And where can people find that?
You can find it at major book retailers,
Yeah.
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, places like that, and also through the book's own websites, tothehiltbook.com or tothehilt.net.
Great. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it really leaves you thinking, doesn't it?
It does.
What is it that truly drives someone to pursue such an extreme, such an inherently perilous art form?
And what can we, maybe in our own less death-defying lives, what can we learn from a life lived so boldly, constantly testing limits, flirting so intimately with the very edge of existence?
Yeah.
That's definitely something worth considering long after you stop listening.
With every breath, dancing close to life and death, stories written deep in flesh, legends born in every test. Through history's winding path, clouds